I've just watched Avatar: The Way of Water, and here are my thoughts. This movie is a visual spectacle, just like you'd expect. Now, they haven't released a lot of details about the plot and characters within the promotional materials in the trailer, so I'm going to do the same and keep that under wraps. There will be no spoilers here. Now, we all know James Cameron is a master filmmaker, and he's already given us two of the greatest sequels of all time with Aliens and Terminator 2. Few would argue against that, and those who do are wrong. Unfortunately, Avatar: The Way of Water doesn't reach the level of those heights. The movie struggles to get beyond just the visual aspect. Yeah, it's a beauty. The 3D goggles, the whole experience, it looks fantastic, especially the elements that take place underwater. This is where the movie really thrives, taking you underwater into some crystal clear, beautiful depths and showing all sorts of new creatures, things that we haven't seen before, which is what we need out of a sequel to Avatar, especially all these years later. We need to see something we haven't seen before. Now, while we get that visually, we don't really get that within the story. Just like the original, the story is just kind of cliched. The characters, they're one-dimensional, and there's not a whole lot of drive to them. There's not a whole lot of well-rounded characters here. And the whole thing ends up feeling kind of simple. In a 3-hour plus movie. This movie is about 3 hours and 18 minutes. That should not be simple. If it's simple, there's a lot of excess in here, things that we don't need. There's a lot of fat that could have been trimmed, and that ends up being the fault here, one of the faults. There are many faults to this movie, but that is one of them. Now, I don't hate this movie, but let me preface this by saying I'm not a huge fan of the original Avatar. I like it. I think it's fine. But when you're looking at James Cameron, this is a master filmmaker. These Avatar movies are at the lower tier of his filmography. They're below movies like Terminator, Terminator 2, Aliens, True Lies, Titanic. The Avatar movies just can't touch him. They can't hold a stick to him. So what we're getting here is just kind of a very delayed sequel that has been hyped up for years, much like the original was, and is probably going to continue to be hyped up. James Cameron wants to retain that box office. That's a big aspect here. So we can expect to probably see this movie running in theaters for an extended period of time, and then being re-released many times, which is what he did to reach that #1 box office. Okay, so now I feel like he's in a competition with Marvel here. Again, I'm trying not to give away a lot of details here because I don't think Jim Cameron wants you to know any details going into this. But when it comes to the villains of the movie, I feel like they don't have very strong motives. They are not well defined. They just aren't great villains. And when you're looking at some of the new characters that get introduced, some of the new characters are more interesting than that of Jake Sully, who is just not a great character. He's not a very likable character, and he's not one who feels like there's much depth to him. All that being said, I do think Avatar: The Way of Water is a better movie than the original Avatar. I prefer this movie. I would watch this movie before I watched the original probably any day of the week. And that largely comes down to, like I said, those water elements. Now, when you're talking about action, this isn't straight up an action movie. I know that's kind of what you think when you think of Avatar. There's not a whole ton of action in it. When the action does happen, some of it's really good, and some of it is by and by just okay. And when you're talking about a visual thing here, we got to address this. I'm sorry, I can't just stand on a soapbox and pretend that everything is beautiful in this movie. For a movie that is so built on its VFX, you would expect those VFX to be perfect. And there are moments in here that don't look great. There are moments in here that come across looking cartoonish and just weird and don't gel with the other elements on screen. It doesn't happen all the time, and like I said, typically underwater it looks great, but when we're talking on land, some things just don't work. And James Cameron does this weird thing here where he's transitioning between frame rates, and it creates a very difficult to watch at times, unpleasant viewing experience. All in all, I think that this movie is fine. You don't want fine with a 3-hour and 18-minute movie, but that's what we've got. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's great. I think it's going to do great at the box office, and I think it's going to have a lot of fans. I'm just not one of those huge major fans. What do you think? Are you excited to see this movie coming out later this year? Drop us a follow on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and stay tuned for more great content.